I was standing in the middle of Disneyland when my phone vibrated. The fireworks were exploding above me, spraying neon blues and burning oranges across the night sky. Children squealed. Music from the parade rolled through the air like laughter made of brass. And in the middle of all that joy, my hands turned ice cold. The message glowed on my screen. Mom, go back to the hotel by yourself. Don't make this harder for us. For a moment, I thought my eyes had tricked me. I blinked again. But the words didn't change. My son's name, Daniel, sat right above them, final and merciless. The paper ticket I had been holding slipped halfway from my fingers. It was bright blue, the color of a childhood promise. I clutched it like a lifeline. Though my palm had gone clammy, I pressed call. It rang twice before he answered. Kan B-M-R, Lidcsi, this out, Daniel. The Vietnamese slipped out before I could stop it. Then, forcing English into my dry throat, I said, Daniel, you're leaving me here? Alone? On the other end, his voice was flat, irritated. Mom, don't make this a scene. You need to understand your place. Your place. 2 words, sharper than the fireworks cracking above me. I turned in a slow circle. People streamed past, parents tugging their kids toward the rides, couples clutching oversized balloons. The air smelled of cotton candy and fried oil. Everything was bright, loud, alive. And yet I stood there as though trapped under glass, the noise muffled, the colors bleeding into nothing. I lowered the phone. My fingers trembled so hard the screen nearly slipped. The ticket fluttered like a wounded bird in my other hand. For 30 years I had worked, sacrificed, and dreamed of days like this with my son. Now, at 58, I was nothing but an obstacle he wanted out of sight. I tried to move toward the exit, but my legs resisted as if they knew leaving meant admitting the truth. My throat burned with questions I didn't dare ask out loud. When did I stop being your mother and start being your burden? When did love become something to hide? A little girl brushed against me, her Minnie Mouse ears slipping sideways. She looked up at me with round, innocent eyes. Her father scooped her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. The sound cut deeper than Daniel's words. I sank onto a bench. The bench was sticky from spilled soda, but I didn't care. I stared at the glowing castle in the distance, its towers reaching into the night like false promises. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Daniel. Don't wait for us. We'll be back late. Please don't call. I wanted to scream, to demand he meet me face to face, to force him to look me in the eye while he erased me. Instead, I pressed the phone to my chest. It felt heavier than stone, as though every sacrifice I had ever made was packed inside it. I whispered into the night, though no one heard me, Daniel, I gave you my life. The crowd surged again, music blaring, the smell of fireworks sharp in my nose. I sat still, small and invisible, in a place designed for joy. The irony bit at me. This park had been the dream I promised Daniel when he was a boy, a bribe I dangled during nights of exhaustion and unpaid bills. One day, we'll go to Disney. One day, you'll see the castle. Now, here we were. And he had left me behind, as though I was a character no longer needed in his story. My chest tightened until I thought my ribs would crack. I couldn't cry. The tears stuck somewhere deep, too proud or too stunned to fall. Around me, families shouted and laughed, fireworks bloomed, children begged for another ride. And I sat with my phone and my useless ticket, my heart louder than all the noise. That was the night I learned the ugliest truth. The person I loved most in this world saw me not as a mother, but as a weight to be discarded. When I was 26, I became a mother and a widow within the same year. Daniel's father died in a construction accident before our son's first birthday. I remember sitting on the hospital steps with a baby in my arms and nothing in my pockets but lint and overdue bills. I had no degree, no savings, and no family who could help. What I did have was a promise to raise Daniel into a man who would never feel the poverty that had suffocated my youth. So I worked and worked and worked. By day, I scrubbed hotel bathrooms until the smell of bleach clung to my hair. At night, I folded shirts in a laundromat that never closed, my hands raw from detergent. On weekends, I served coffee in a diner where truckers left greasy tips that smelled of diesel. 3 jobs, 18 hours a day. There were months when I slept no more than 3 hours a night, curled on the couch while Daniel snored in his crib. I counted the sacrifices not in years, but in numbers. 42 overtime shifts in one winter just to cover his preschool tuition. 17,400 hours of work in the decade that followed. Hours I could have spent reading, traveling, falling in love again. 212,000 wired to Daniel over the years. Tuition, rent, medical bills, the endless emergencies that arrived like clockwork. And still, I told myself, this is love. This is motherhood. The strange irony was that in between those endless jobs, I found beauty in broken things. A neighbor once threw away a cracked porcelain doll. I glued her face back together, painted her eyes, stitched a new dress from scraps. When I showed Daniel, he clapped like I'd performed magic. That moment became my escape. Years later, I turned it into a profession. I studied restoration techniques at night classes. I apprenticed under an old curator at the City Museum. Piece by piece, I built a reputation as someone who could resurrect forgotten dolls, repair century-old toys until they looked as though they had just been loved again. People started calling me the doll doctor. Wealthy collectors sent me boxes of shattered porcelain from Paris and Vienna. Museums hired me to preserve rare marionettes. My fingers, once raw from bleach and detergent, now handled silk and glass with surgical precision. And yet, even as I restored these delicate creatures, I couldn't see that I was letting my own life crack. The Disney dream became my carrot on a stick. I whispered it into Daniel's ear whenever bills piled too high. One day, I'll take you to see Mickey. One day, we'll watch the fireworks. In 1998, when Daniel was 5, I finally saved enough for 2 tickets. They were printed on thick blue paper, with the Disney castle shimmering faintly like a secret. He held that ticket like treasure. That night, he looked up at me with eyes too large for his face and asked, "Mom, do I get to go to Disney tomorrow?" "Yes," I told him, pressing my pinky against his. "As long as you promise me you'll study hard, I'll do everything it takes." And I meant it. I meant it so much I nearly broke myself in half. I became the machine that printed money, the woman who could always find an extra shift, an extra loan, an extra sacrifice. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that I was also a woman who deserved to live. I turned my youth into a money-printing machine, never realizing I was starving my own soul. When I close my eyes, I can still see the apartment we shared in those early years. It was one room with peeling paint, a sagging couch, and a window whose blinds never quite shut. At night, the yellow streetlight spilled through the gaps, striping the floor like prison bars. I used to hold Daniel against my chest on that couch, rocking him until his breath deepened. His hair smelled faintly of milk. My bones ached, but in those moments, the world felt almost gentle. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I came home to find him sitting at the tiny kitchen table with a toy in his hands. It was a plastic doll soldier. The arm snapped clean off. He looked at me solemnly and asked, "Mom, can you fix him?" I laughed through my exhaustion. "I can try." I found an old screw in the drawer, heated the tip of a needle over the stove, and fused the arm back into place. The doll was crooked, imperfect, but whole again. Daniel beamed as though I'd saved a real person. "See," he said, hugging it, "you fix everything." That sentence carved itself into me. From then on, I wasn't just repairing dolls. I was repairing Daniel's world. When he failed a test, I hired a tutor I couldn't afford. When his sneakers wore thin, I bought new ones even if it meant skipping meals. When he wanted to join a soccer team, I worked extra shifts for the fee. I became addicted to fixing. Not just toys, not just antiques, but every crack in his life. Sometimes I wonder if that was my biggest mistake, teaching him that broken things would always be made whole, that I would always find the glue, the time, the money, because love is not supposed to erase consequences. But I erased them all, and in those nights, as I tucked him in beneath a blanket thin as paper, I believed one simple truth: if I love him enough, he will never leave me. If I give everything, he will always stay. I was wrong. Back then, I truly believed love alone could anchor him. I never imagined it would be the very thing that let him drift away. After Disney, something inside me broke. Not with a scream, but with the quiet snap of porcelain when it slips from a careless hand. I went home carrying silence heavier than any suitcase. Days later, I sat in front of my laptop. The glow from the screen lit the wrinkles around my fingers, the same fingers that had mended thousands of dolls. The online banking page blinked back at me, the cursor hovering over a scheduled transfer, 2,500 to Daniel Harper. My hand trembled on the mouse. For years, this movement had been automatic like breathing. Click, confirm, send. Always send. Tuition, rent, groceries, car repairs, emergencies. Each click was a vow that I still mattered to him, that money could buy me a place in his life. But tonight, the air in my apartment felt too thin, pressing against my lungs. My stomach twisted as if warning me, if you press that button again, you will die, not in body, but in spirit. I whispered the words out loud, my throat raw. If I don't stop now, I will dry up like an old doll left in the attic. The cursor blinked, a tiny pulse daring me to decide. I closed my eyes, inhaled until my chest hurt, and moved my finger, not to confirm, but to cancel. The word appeared in red letters: transaction canceled. For a moment, I sat frozen, waiting for guilt to crush me. Instead, a strange stillness spread through my chest. Not joy, not relief, just silence, like the hush after the shattering of glass. I got up and walked to the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me had dark circles under her eyes, gray streaks in her hair, and a mouth pressed tight as though afraid to speak. I leaned closer until my breath fogged the glass. Elena, I told her softly, you are a mother, but you are also a human being. The woman in the mirror blinked back at me. For once, I believed her. That night, I locked my bank account with new passwords Daniel didn't know. My fingers hesitated on each keystroke, but I forced them steady. Each new code felt like a wall rising between me and the people I loved most and feared most. And when I clicked Save Changes, I whispered the truth I had buried for 30 years. I locked my account, and for the first time, I locked my heart against being used. Silence has weight. I never realized that until Daniel stopped calling. The first day, I told myself he was busy. The second day, I imagined his phone had died. By the third, I knew better. Instead of his voice, I received messages from Clara. Her words dripped like acid dressed in sugar. Older people get stubborn when they're lonely. Daniel worries about you, but maybe you don't care about his future anymore. Each line was a blade slipped neatly between my ribs. I set the phone face down on the table, but it still pulsed with notifications. Every vibration rattled through my bones, heavy, unbearable. That phone weighed 1,000 pounds, anchoring me to fear. The apartment turned hostile. The clock ticked louder than usual. My own footsteps echoed too sharply against the wooden floor. Even the refrigerator's hum sounded like a warning. When the landline rang one afternoon, I nearly screamed. I didn't answer. The ring drilled through the walls, each chime a reminder. They are waiting for you to bend, to pay, to surrender. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the blue Disney ticket tucked into a book on the shelf. My hands itched to tear it in half, but I couldn't. That slip of paper had survived 25 years. It was proof of promises once pure. Now it mocked me with what those promises had cost. Nights stretched long. I lay awake replaying Daniel's words at Disney. You need to understand your place. My place. Was it always to be the wallet in the room, the shadow at the table? I wanted to call him to beg for a sign of love, even a scrap. But the thought of hearing his silence on the other end was worse than not calling at all. So I waited in a house filled with echoes and a phone that grew heavier every hour. And as the silence thickened, I understood something chilling. Before every storm, there is a calm. And this silence was the most dangerous calm of all. The knock came on a Sunday evening. It wasn't the polite rhythm of neighbors. It was sharp, deliberate, two thuds, then silence, then two more. The kind of knock that says, "We know you're home and we're not leaving." I opened the door. Daniel stood there, jaw tight, his wife Clara half a step behind him. Clara's lips curled in what she might have called a smile, but her eyes glinted too cold. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice clipped, "we need to talk." I let them in. The kitchen felt too small once they stepped inside, the yellow light above the table flickering faintly as if nervous itself. Clara placed her handbag carefully on a chair, then pulled out a manila folder. Daniel laid it flat on the table, spreading papers as though he were setting down a deck of cards. "This is for your own good," he said. I sat slowly, my hands resting on the edge of the table. The paper between us glowed under the weak light, black letters marching across white. I didn't need to read every word. I knew the shape of betrayal when I saw it. Daniel cleared his throat. "It's a simple power of attorney. You sign here, and I can take care of all your financial matters. Bills, investments, everything. You won't have to worry." His voice was smooth, but underneath it I heard steel. Clara reached forward, tapping the signature line with one polished fingernail. "Think of the relief, Elena," she murmured. "You've carried this burden too long. Daniel just wants to make sure you're safe." I let the silence stretch. The clock on the wall ticked louder than ever, a cruel metronome. Finally, I looked at my son. "You want to take care of me, Daniel?" "Of course," he said quickly. "That's what family does." I leaned closer, my eyes holding his. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Do you want to take care of me? Or do you want to take care of my bank account?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Daniel's jaw clenched. Clara shifted, her smile faltering into a sneer. "Mom," Daniel snapped, "why do you always think the worst of me? Haven't I always been there for you?" I laughed once, bitter and sharp. "You left me standing alone at Disney, Daniel. I was there because of you. Tell me again how you've been there for me." His face flushed crimson. "That's not fair." "What's not fair," I said, my voice rising, "is asking me to sign away the last piece of myself after I've already given you everything." Clara's voice sliced in, sugar-coated venom. "Elena, you're making this dramatic. Do you really want strangers handling your affairs when your own son is willing?" I turned to her, my chest tight but my gaze unwavering. "I'd rather trust strangers than hand my life to people who see me as a wallet." Her cheeks twitched. Daniel slammed his palm on the table. The papers jumped. "Enough. Just sign the damn form." The shout ricocheted off the kitchen walls, vibrating through me. For a second, fear clawed at my chest. Then it burned away, replaced by something fiercer. I reached for the papers. Daniel's shoulders eased, mistaking the gesture for surrender. I lifted the sheets, their weight thin but heavy with intent. Then, slowly, deliberately, I tore them down the middle. The sound of ripping filled the room, louder than his shout, louder than my heartbeat. Strip by strip, I shredded the form until nothing remained but confetti of false promises. I dropped the pieces into the trash can beside the sink. They landed with a hollow whisper. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel stared at the shredded paper as if it were his own lifeline I had cut. Clara's face twisted, outrage painting her features. I stood, my knees steady, my spine straighter than it had been in years. The words rose unbidden, but they rang with the weight of truth. I am no longer a shadow in my own home. Daniel's eyes widened, his mouth opening, then snapping shut. For once, he had no reply. I walked to the doorway, my hand firm on the frame. You should go, Mom. His voice cracked, but I didn't let him finish. You should go before you say something you can't take back. Clara gathered the scraps of her dignity, snatching her handbag with a violent tug. She swept past me, perfume cloying in the air. Daniel lingered for a moment longer, his eyes flicking from me to the trash. But I didn't move. I didn't waver. Finally, he muttered, "You'll regret this." I met his gaze, my own steady. "No, Daniel, for once I won't." And with that, I closed the door behind them. The latch clicked into place, the sound sharp and final, like a gavel striking judgment. I leaned against the wood, breath shaking but body unbroken. My hands smelled faintly of ink and paper dust. The kitchen light above me steadied, burning strong now, as though it too had decided to hold its ground. For years, I had been invisible, my sacrifices hidden, my needs ignored, my love taken for granted, but not anymore. That night, alone in my kitchen, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer the ghost in my own story. Rumors spread faster than truth. 2 weeks after I tore Daniel's papers, whispers began to circle. My landlord mentioned someone had asked whether I was mentally stable. A neighbor hinted that Daniel and Clara had been telling people I was becoming forgetful, leaving the stove on, losing track of money. Then came the official blow, a letter from a law firm. According to their filing, Daniel was petitioning the court to gain control of my finances on the grounds that I was suffering from early dementia. I read the words 3 times, each line heavier than the last. Dementia? Me? The woman who had balanced 3 jobs and a child for decades? The woman who could still stitch a porcelain doll's hair strand by strand under a magnifying glass? My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the letter. For the first time, fear slid cold down my spine. This wasn't just family cruelty anymore. This was war. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a lined notebook. The yellow lamp threw a cone of light across the page. My pen scratched furiously as I began to write. Every phone call, every transfer, every emergency Daniel had invented. Dates, times, amounts. 600 for a car battery, 4,200 for a semester of classes, 1,750 for rent. Line after line, page after page. The notebook became a graveyard of my sacrifices. Margaret, my neighbor, knocked gently. She had lived across the hall for 15 years, a retired teacher with sharp eyes and a kinder heart. "Elena," she said softly, "I've seen what they're trying to do. You're not alone. I'll stand up for you." Her words steadied me, a flicker of warmth in the cold. Still, the lies grew louder. Friends stopped calling. At the grocery store, I felt eyes on me, people wondering if I'd forgotten how to count change. One evening, Clara sent a message dripping with venom. "It would be easier if you admitted you're slipping. We just want to help." I pressed my pen to the paper harder, underlining the day, the time, the exact words. If they wanted to turn truth into darkness, I would fight with light. If they wanted to turn truth into darkness, then I would light it up with every detail I wrote down. The discovery came almost by accident. Clara had stopped by one morning pretending concern. She brought a basket of fruit, the kind wrapped too perfectly in plastic, and fussed over how tired. I looked. When she left, in her hurry, she forgot a folder on the chair. At first, I ignored it. My instinct was to avoid anything that reeked of her perfume. But hours later, as the silence of the apartment pressed in, my eyes returned to it. The folder was thick, sealed with a flimsy clasp. My fingers hovered. Opening it would mean crossing a line. But hadn't they already crossed every line with me? I unclasped it. Inside, page after page of forms, affidavits, documents already bearing my name. My signature, except it wasn't mine. The loops of the E in Elena were wrong. The flourish at the end, unnatural. Clara's careful hand mimicking me, but not well enough. My chest constricted. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. My hands trembled as though the paper itself was electrified. I wanted to vomit, to scream, to crumple every page and burn it. But beneath the horror, something else surged. Clarity. They were willing to fake my very name to erase me. And that, paradoxically, made me stronger. My fingers shook as I gathered the evidence back into the folder. My breath came ragged, but my eyes had never been clearer. My hands trembled, but my eyes had never shone brighter. The next morning, I walked into the office of Mr. Cole, a lawyer recommended by Margaret. His office smelled faintly of old books and coffee, the shelves stacked with case files. He looked at me over wire-rimmed glasses, his expression neither pitying nor skeptical, just focused. I slid the folder across his desk. He opened it, scanned the forged signatures, and let out a low whistle. "They've made a mistake," he said. "Forgery. This sloppy can be torn apart in court, but it won't be easy. Are you ready for a fight?" I met his gaze. "I've been fighting my whole life. This time, I want to win." From that day, preparation became my new full-time job. I gathered everything: bank statements, copies of wire transfers, even old text messages from Daniel asking for money. Mr. Cole coached me through questions I might face, drilling me until my answers were sharp. At night, I practiced in front of the mirror. At first, my voice cracked, my shoulders hunched. The woman staring back at me looked fragile, uncertain, but repetition carved steel into my words. "Elena," I told the reflection one evening, "you've restored dolls with missing limbs and shattered faces. Surely you can restore your own life." The reflection nodded back. Friends who still believed in me rallied. Margaret sat with me, reading out practice questions. Another neighbor baked bread and left it by my door with notes. "Stay strong." Their small kindnesses stitched patches onto my frayed courage. On the night before my first court date, I stood again before the mirror. My palms were sweaty, my heart pounding, but as I looked into my own eyes, I felt something shift. "I had spent my life restoring dolls," I whispered. This time, I was restoring myself. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The air smelled faintly of dust and polished wood, a scent that reminded me of old libraries. At the front, the judge's bench loomed like a fortress, and every creak of the wooden pews echoed too loudly. When the bailiff called the case, Harper versus Harper, I felt my chest tighten. To hear my own last name twisted into a battlefield made bile rise in my throat. Daniel sat across from me, jaw tight, his suit too sharp, as if clothes could cover cruelty. Clara perched beside him, whispering into his ear, her nails digging into his arm like talons. The judge entered. A gavel struck wood, its sound cracking through the room. And the performance began. Daniel's lawyer rose first, guiding him like a puppet to the witness stand. Daniel straightened, his voice dripping with feigned concern. "My mother has been struggling," he said, eyes wide with practiced sorrow. "She forgets conversations. She repeats herself. Just last month, she left her oven on all night. Clara and I are only trying to protect her." I clenched my fists. Lies, each one. The lawyer paced. "Would you say your mother is capable of managing large sums of money responsibly?" Daniel's mouth curved into pity. "Not anymore. She gets confused. She's vulnerable to being taken advantage of. We just want to make sure she's safe." Safe. The word tasted bitter. He wanted to make sure my money was safe in his hands. Mr. Cole, my lawyer, stood. "Mrs. Harper, please take the stand." My legs trembled as I walked, but when I sat, something inside me steadied. The Bible felt cool beneath my palm as I swore to tell the truth. Daniel's lawyer pounced. "Mrs. Harper, do you admit you sometimes struggle with memory?" "No," I said firmly. "I remember too much." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. He leaned closer. "Isn't it true you've been paranoid about your son's intentions?" I met his gaze. "No, I'm not paranoid. I've simply stopped being blind." And truth doesn't need a magnifying glass to be seen. The courtroom murmured. The judge rapped the gavel once. Mr. Cole presented my notebook page after page of dates, amounts, transfers. My penmanship filled the room with undeniable history. Next, he held up the folder Clara had left behind, the forged signatures, the clumsy imitation of my name. Gasps rippled through the benches. Clara's face flushed, her hands twisting in her lap. Finally, Mr. Cole placed a single blue Disney ticket on the evidence table. This, he said, is from 1998. Mrs. Harper saved it as proof of the promises she kept to her son. She carried it to remind herself of love. That love has been exploited, Your Honor. I stared at the ticket, its color faded but still alive, a fragment of innocence turned weapon. The opposing lawyer sneered. Mrs. Harper, isn't this all just bitterness? A mother unwilling to let go. Bitterness. The word cut, but I swallowed it down. I lifted my chin. I am not a walking safe deposit box. I am a human being with a heart that has bled and hands that have mended things others thought broken. I gave my son love, but I will not hand him the keys to my bank account. If motherhood is reduced to money, then today I choose dignity. Silence followed. Even the judge's pen paused mid-note. Hours later, after arguments tangled and unraveled, the judge's voice rang clear. This court finds insufficient evidence that Mrs. Harper is incapable of managing her affairs. The petition is denied. Further, the presented evidence of forged documents raises serious legal concerns that will be reviewed separately. Denied. The word fell like rain after drought. My chest loosened, my lungs filling as if for the first time in years. I had won. That night, I returned home alone. The trial had drained me, left me both lighter and emptier. I sat in my living room, the yellow lamp glowing softly. Across from me, the armchair Daniel used to sprawl in sat empty. The cushion bore a faint indentation, a ghost of years gone. I picked up my phone. It felt light in my hand, so light compared to the 1,000 pounds it had weighed weeks earlier. No messages from Daniel, no venom from Clara, just silence. For the first time, the silence didn't frighten me. It embraced me, gentle, steady. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My heart whispered both triumph and grief. I had won. Yet deep inside, I knew I had lost something I could never win back. The lamp's glow stretched across the floor, spilling over the empty chair. I let the light fill the room, refusing to think of shadows. The house sold faster than I expected. For 30 years, it had been my anchor wall soaked with sacrifice, rooms echoing with memories both tender and cruel. But when the papers were signed and the keys slipped from my hand, I felt no grief, only release. I packed light, a single suitcase, my passport, and a small wooden box holding 3 things. My restoration tools, the old Disney ticket, and a brass key from the new lock I'd installed during the storm of Daniel's threats. I kept the key not to guard a door anymore, but as a reminder of the boundaries I had finally learned to set. Italy had always been a dream I'd shelved, a postcard tacked on the wall of my imagination. Now, with no one left to bind me, I booked a one-way flight. Florence greeted me with cobblestone streets that sang beneath my shoes and cathedrals that rose like stone hymns to the sky. The air smelled of espresso and old leather, of history baked into every brick. One morning, I found a cafe tucked into a narrow alley, its tables spilling into sunlight. I sat outside, lifting a porcelain cup of cappuccino so light it felt like a feather. For years, a phone had weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. Now, a cup of coffee felt weightless. The street bustled with artists selling sketches, tourists snapping photos, locals laughing in lilting Italian. I watched, not as an outsider aching to belong, but as a woman finally free to simply be. I raised my cup toward the piazza, whispering to myself, "This is what life feels like when it is mine." In Florence, I discovered a guild of artisans devoted to restoring antique dolls and marionettes. Their workshop was tucked behind a faded green door, the air inside scented with varnish and dust. They welcomed me like family. I showed them how I had once rethreaded a century-old doll's hair strand by strand. They marveled at my patience, at the way my fingers still held steady despite the tremors of age. For weeks, I worked alongside them, mending cracked porcelain, stitching faded silk. Each doll placed before me felt like a mirror of myself, broken once but not beyond repair. One afternoon, as I reattached a tiny arm to a doll no taller than my hand, a thought came clear. I had spent my life restoring others. Now, every stitch was restoring me. In my pocket, I carried the brass key from the house I no longer owned. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I held it in my palm. It reminded me of the night I locked my accounts, locked my heart, and chose myself. Now, in Florence, I no longer needed that lock. I wasn't closing doors anymore. I was opening them. To new cities, new friendships, new breaths of air unchained from fear. One evening, standing on the Ponte Vecchio Bridge as the Arno River shimmered gold beneath the sunset, I let the key slip from my hand. It dropped into the river with the softest splash, swallowed by the current. I smiled. For the first time in years, I had nothing left to guard. I wandered through markets, tasted gelato that melted like joy on my tongue, laughed with strangers whose names I never learned. I no longer thought of bank accounts or forged signatures, no longer waited for a phone to buzz with demands. At night, I wrote in a new notebook not lists of money lost, but stories of places seen, of dolls reborn, of a heart that had finally unclenched. In Florence, freedom didn't feel dramatic. It wasn't fireworks or parades. It was quieter, deeper, the weightless lift of a cup of coffee, the slow rhythm of footsteps unhurried, the gentle hum of a life lived on my own terms. As I packed my tools one evening after a long day at the Guild, I caught my reflection in a shop window. The woman staring back wasn't a ghost nor a shadow. She was simply me, lined with years, yes, but also lit from within. I thought of the girl who once believed love could keep a son forever close, the woman who turned herself into a machine of sacrifice, the mother abandoned in Disney's neon glow. And then I thought of the woman I had become. I whispered aloud, to Florence, to the dolls, to the life still stretching ahead. I left my past behind like an old dress and slipped into freedom that finally fit. And for once, the world around me seemed to nod in agreement. If you are still here with me, thank you. It means you have walked beside me through every shadowed hallway, every courtroom echo, every tear I tried to swallow. You sat with me in silence, heavier than iron, and you lifted that same silence with me until it turned into freedom. I don't take that lightly. Words can only go so far. The rest is carried by hearts willing to listen. And if yours has listened this long, then you already know. This isn't just my story. In some way, it might be yours too. I learned the hard way that love without boundaries becomes a cage. That sacrifice, if endless, can hollow a person until nothing is left but a shape of who they once were. I learned that even a mother's heart can be broken by the very child it beats for. But I also learned something else. Broken things can be restored. Dolls, promises, women in their 50s who thought life was over. If you give them light, patience, and a steady hand, they can live again. So now I ask you, directly, if one day you realize you've been nothing more than a clock wound by someone else's hand, will you stop or will you wind your own spring? That is the question I leave you with, because I cannot answer it for you. Each of us must choose, surrender to the weight, or rise into the air where freedom waits. I chose freedom. I chose to unlock the door and step through, even if it meant stepping alone. And I survived. More than survived. I began again. If my journey stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Tell me in the comments what part of my story echoed inside your bones. Have you been used, overlooked, or left behind? Or have you already found your way back to yourself? I would love to hear. And if you want to walk with me further through other stories of boundaries, courage, and renewal, follow this page, subscribe, stay connected. Each week, I will open another door, light another lamp, and invite you to sit at the table with me. Your presence matters more than you think. When you read, when you comment, when you share, you aren't just supporting a story. You are supporting the choice to live with dignity, to believe that even when love hurts, freedom can heal. So thank you again for being here, for listening, for carrying this weight with me until it grew lighter. My name is Elena Harper. This was my journey, and now it belongs to you too.